Hey everybody, thank you for joining me for another episode of compatibility around objective personality and Myers-Briggs. In the first episode, I talked about the nervous system being the bedrock of this whole conversation around relationships. And later on, we're going to get into more details about how the functions and the different parts of our personality are attached to our nervous system and how that plays out in connections. Before we do that, I think there is a little bit more groundwork to lay here. I think we need to define compatibility and talk about compatibility a little bit, because that's what this series is about. I think there's a lot of different ideas of what compatibility means, and compatibility is a very abstract idea. So I think we need to add some clarity before we get further into any details around type compatibility and things like that. So what is compatibility? Well, I have a pretty simple working definition of compatibility, but I want to tease it out. I think compatibility simply is, do you want the relationship that you're in, truly, and are you satisfied by it? If both partners can truly say yes, I think it's a compatible connection. Now, here's the catch. When people first meet one another and the relationship is new, a lot of people would say they want the relationship and they're satisfied by it, right? And after the chemicals, the introductory chemicals of that relationship, which is called limerence, fades, it seems to no longer be as compatible. But I still think we can define compatibility that way. Now, the catch is, I think when a lot of us talk about compatibility, we're also assuming sustainability. And most of the people in this culture, anyhow, would mean sustainable for a lifetime. So there's a lot of assumptions nested in compatibility. If you're just thinking of compatibility as, I think, what it is in its basic sense, you want a relationship and you're satisfied by it. There's enough harmony in it that you, in all of yourself, really want to stay in the connection, and you're satisfied by it. I think that's a pretty good working definition of compatibility, but we are assuming a fit for life, a good fit that can last through the ups and downs of life. So I think sustainability is really also in our mind when we talk about compatibility. And that's important to emphasize, because as we talk about this, we will talk about how some of these combinations wear you down over time. So some people you'll be compatible with for the short term, and those are not necessarily failed relationships. They help you see what could last longer. And I think there's a lot of different ideas around relationship success, so it's important to get in tune with what it means for you. But I think for most of us, when we think of compatibility, we are thinking about the ability to find someone who we can sustain a connection with, that we want to be with, that we're satisfied by for the rest of our lives in general. And so I think that is my working definition of compatibility and what I'm going to assume as I work through this. An important caveat to this is that you've got to be in tune with yourself enough to know what you want and what your emotions are, and is there any parts of you in relationships that you're suppressing? In other words, if you could put all your guards down, any pretenses that you have, and just be asked, look, if you could step away from this relationship with no consequences, no emotional consequences, no logistical consequences in life, and just reset, would you choose it again? And I think that answer If it's yes, that's a compatible connection. It's something you're drawn to and continue to be drawn to. I think that's what we mean by compatibility. If any of you have what you think is a better working definition or any nuance you want to add to that, feel free to comment below. But I think generally that's what we're thinking of. So with that being said, I want to read something that I wrote out about 2 years ago on this topic. I figured I'd just read it so it's easier. And then I want to make a closing point about compatibility. So I wrote this out. The modern science of relationships is a very saturated space with thoughts abounding around what makes an intimate relationship successful. Many opinions abound regarding what is required of a healthy, intimate connection. However, in my opinion, the most misunderstood aspect of relationships is the concept of compatibility. Compatibility is the ability to exist or occur with another person without conflict. Obviously, this is relative, since there is no such thing as perfect compatibility. However, when we say compatibility in relationships, I think what we most mean is the ability to exist together with enough reciprocity that maintaining the intimate relationship is more constructive and fulfilling than leaving. Again, you want to stay and you're satisfied. While this dynamic involves effort, I think many place too much trust in the efficacy of effort and good intentions in intimate relationships. At the same time, they undermine and misunderstand the massive impact of compatibility in the connection. Further, many don't give enough credence to the deterministic nature of what is compatible. While many often rightly consider environment and mindset in relationship dynamics, they often ignore the concrete nature of the functions and their impact on compatibility. If relationship advice is to be most constructive, it must continue its emphasis on personal responsibility and awareness of childhood. What is that word? Internalization. I'm just going to say awareness of childhood patterns. However, it must do so in the context of honoring the fundamental natures of the individuals involved. This, in my opinion, is the major missing piece in the modern conversations around relationships. Focus in this area would greatly aid in furthering therapeutic modalities in marriage and family dynamics and serve to foster greater respect of our individuality and how it influences our abilities to exist in various relational contexts. While we might be tempted to ignore determinism because of how it threatens our senses of individual liberty, if we do not become more aware of how our default wiring powerfully influences every connection we have, we will ignorantly and unnecessarily continue discouraged at the altar of that liberty. We must learn to respect who we fundamentally are. It is only then that we will be quote unquote free to leverage that knowledge of our environments and efforts of self-improvement and awareness of ourselves more in our favor. The more that compatibility studies incorporate this fact, the more realistic we can be, the kinder we can be to ourselves, and the more effectively we can pursue connections that are reciprocal, mutually constructive, and fulfilling. Relationships we actually want to stay in, that honor both parties involved and serve the greater good of each individual. This is what compatibility is all about. So I have an analogy on this. I talked in my conversation with Josh, who's a good friend of mine, INTJ. We went riding go-karts for my birthday. And myself, I'm an ISTP. My other friend that was there was a He's an INTP jumper, so he's TISI. He's also a number 2. He's consume last, and I'm play last. Josh is a sleep last, NITE number 4. And our other buddy, I'm pretty sure, is NIFE number 4. So, and Josh and him are double feminine, and myself and my other friend, who's the INTP, is audio. So we all went and rode go-karts for my birthday, indoor go-karts. It was a lot of fun. We all had a really good time. And some of us were better than others at the go-karts. And it's not surprising based on our types who was better at the go-karts. So the two, save your sensors, myself and my other number 2 friend, who's another IP, we were more attuned to the sensory and excelled much faster at the go-karts. Now, there are other spheres where an INTJ and an INFJ would be more attuned to the environment and would excel. This is true in any aspect of life. There are certain types that excel more at athletics. Certainly effort is involved, but genetics are involved too. And so we can't downplay that in any discipline, whether it's talent, work, and especially relationships. So the idea that you can be with any type and that it could be compatible if you're mature enough, it's a zero-sum losing game from the start. It's like saying anybody who wants to be a professional baseball pitcher could be one. And it's just a lie. It's not true. It's frankly impossible. And so I think if we have this context from the start, there are relationships that we are compatible for and relationships that we are not compatible for. And I think the thermostat on that is, long-term, do we continue to want to be with this person, and are we satisfied in this relationship? Now, again, this is all relative. Satisfaction is very relative. There could be sexual satisfaction, there could be emotional satisfaction. There's lots of different things to consider. I'm not saying relationships are going to be perfect or that a compatible relationship is going to always be just wonderfully amazing and blissful, which is going to bring me to my last point here that I'd like to close out with. But what I'm saying is that whoever you're with, if you want to be with them and they are satisfying you, I'm saying relative to being by yourself. If they're not, and it's a degrading relationship to you emotionally, you're going to want to leave it, and it's not a compatible one. So I want to finish with this. There is a book, a good book, if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it, called Can Love Last by Stephen Mitchell. There we go, that's clear. Can Love Last. Highly recommended, great book. The basic premise of this book is that lasting love is based on the ability for a couple to handle the tension between novelty and excitement and peace and safety. Okay? So think of these as opposite ends of the spectrum. Typically, when you get in a new romantic relationship, it's going to be exciting, right? It's going to be novel. You're going to feel the big romantic feelings. Over time, there's a tendency to drift toward something more safer, right? Now, not every relationship's like this. Some relationships are not safe, and the more you get to know the person, the further you drift. But in general, here's what I want to finish with. The most compatible relationships, in my belief at this time, the ones that we want to stay in and that we're satisfied by, have the ability to hold a really tight tension between those two realities at the same time. Okay, again, novelty and peace. Okay, if you've got too much calm and safety, it's boring. If you've got too much excitement, it's triggering, right? So the type of compatibility that I think is actually sustainable is somewhere in between the two. And it's one where the couple can hold that tension together long term. They can keep things exciting. There are aspects of each other that really draw them in and are attractive. And then there are also there's this aspect of safety. Now you can't have all one or all the other, right? Because the moment everything is safe, perfectly safe, and there's no risk, there's no reward either, right? This is the nature of life. And so being able to hold that tension past the initial limerence phase is, I think, the core of compatibility. So again, I highly recommend that book, but I think it makes the point and kind of closes things out here of what we're saying with compatibility is, can you stay in a connection with someone that you want to stay in with basically all of your being, and that is satisfying to you? If both partners can say yes and both want to stay, then I think it's a compatible connection. So with that context, we're going to be talking through from an ops perspective, a Myers-Briggs perspective, what connections make for the best compatibility. And there's not a perfect science to this. There never will be, because we're all very different and we all have different values and we all want different things. So it's never going to be, well, this type should be with this type. It's more about figuring out what these different parts of your personality are going to do to impact these different aspects of compatibility, especially in that tension between excitement and peace. So life is vibration. There's no straight line. We are looking for someone who can dance in that vibration with us and maintain satisfaction with. And I think there are types out there that we can do that better with. Just like there are certain personalities that are going to be better baseball pitchers or go-kart drivers. We can find connections that are fulfilling long term, but it really does start with our relationship with ourself, a lot of self-awareness, and really figuring out what we want in connection. So I hope that this series helps you discover more about that. That's my ultimate goal, and I'm really excited to start getting into more details with you. Thanks for tuning in. It got dark out here, but I will see you guys soon.